The Vatican announced that the Pope, the first Latin American to head the Roman Catholic Church, passed away this morning at the age of 88. It is said that his entire life had been dedicated to the service of the Lord and his church. Well, his death comes a day after he appeared in St. Peter's Square, where he wished thousands of worshippers happy Easter. Well, the announcement of the Pope's death was made by Cardinal Kevin Farrell, who will preside over the conclave to elect the next Pope.
Dear brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis. At 7:35 this morning, the Bishop of Rome, Francis, returned to the house of the Father. His entire life was dedicated to the service of the Lord and his church. He taught us to live the values of the gospel with fidelity, courage, and universal love, especially towards the poorest and most marginalized. With immense gratitude for his example as a true disciple of the Lord Jesus, we commend the soul of Pope Francis to the infinite merciful love of the triune God.
Cardinal Kevin Farrell there announcing the pontiff's death. The cardinal will then preside over the conclave to elect the next pope. Well, our religion editor Aline McBall looks back at Pope Francis's life.
To the end, there for those he felt most connected with, greeting the masses on Easter Sunday, his last public act. Always a pope devoted to his work, finding it difficult to rest even when told he had to. Recently meeting the King after his 5-week stay in hospital, and yesterday, the US Vice President. His surprise election in 2013 would mark a more radical break with the past than many expected. Jorge Bergoglio did have Italian roots, but was born in Argentina. While studying for priesthood, he worked briefly as a nightclub bouncer. While many fellow Jesuits were jailed and tortured during Argentina's military dictatorship, he rose to become Archbishop of Buenos Aires, some accusing him of forging too close a relationship with the regime. As Pope, he greeted his flock having taken the name of a saint who championed the cause of the poor. Francis signalled that his pontificate would be rooted not in Rome, but in the lives of believers around the world, and especially those on the economic margins. His style was informal, even when conducting ceremonies, and his first act as Pope was to pay his own hotel bill. In his early gestures, like washing the feet of the elderly and prisoners, he showed desire for his priests to be closer to the disadvantaged. He spoke out for the protection of migrants and refugees, laying a wreath on the waters where so many died on their perilous journeys. He travelled widely, drawing energy from the crowds. In Brazil, 3 million gathered on Copacabana Beach. And in the Philippines, he broke records for the world's largest mass, as 6 million turned out to join him. He linked economic inequality to the environment. In a video launching a papal encyclical, he said climate change amounted to rich countries inflicting damage on poor ones.
The Pope of the Holy See!
In 2015, he became the first pope to address the US Congress.
I am most grateful for your invitation,
telling the world's richest nation to take care of Mother Earth.
God bless America.
He apologized for the scandal of sexual abuse of children by priests. His words here spoken by a translator.
God weeps for the sexual abuse of children.
On a visit to Ireland, the first by a pope in almost 40 years, he apologized to victims at almost every event, but scandals continued to emerge. His papacy marked something of a change of tone on the subject of homosexuality, early on remarking, "Who am I to judge?" when talking about a gay bishop. But some progressives argue that in practical terms, the Vatican's stance and the Church's teachings have changed little. Even so, conservative Catholics viewed him with suspicion. But in some ways, he was as traditional as Pope John Paul II, whom he made a saint. And he had very conservative views on abortion, contraception, surrogacy, and gender reassignment. His style of papacy, though, couldn't have been more different to his immediate predecessor, Benedict XVI, whose funeral he presided over. Through the scores of cardinals from the developing world he appointed, he changed the complexion of the church hierarchy, consolidating a shift in the centre of gravity of Catholicism away from Europe, where it was in decline, toward Latin America, Asia and sub-Saharan Africa. In recent years, Pope Francis was beset by health issues, most noticeably affecting his mobility. In February, he was admitted to hospital with pneumonia in both lungs, but was focused on being able to return to participate in Easter celebrations, a goal he managed to fulfill, greeting the crowds in Rome.
Cari fratelli e sorelle, buona Pasqua.
He was, above all, a pastoral pope, a man of humility who preferred the fellowship of ordinary believers to the trappings of ecclesiastical status and power.
Our religion editor there, Aline McBall, reflecting on the life of the late Pope Francis. Pope Francis taking that name after Saint Assisi, who was a saint who lived his life as a beggar because he believed in giving to the poor and he believed in the importance of humility. And Pope Francis taking that name on for himself when he became pontiff, because humility was at the heart of his beliefs. Lots of statements coming in paying tribute. We've just heard from President Obama and Michelle Obama on the passing of Pope Francis. They say that he was the rare leader who made us want to be better people. In his humility and his gestures at once simple and profound, embracing the sick, ministering to the homeless, washing the feet of young prisoners. He shook us out of our complacency and reminded us that we are all bound by moral obligations to God and one another. President Obama adds that today Michelle and I mourn with everyone around the world, Catholic and non-Catholic alike, who drew strength and inspiration from the Pope's example. May we continue to heed his call to never remain on the sidelines of this march of living hope. So President Obama and Michelle Obama, they're just issuing their tributes to Pope Francis. We can speak to Professor of Historical Theology at Villanova University, Massimo Faggioli, who joins us now. Professor Faggioli, of course, we talk about the humility of the pontiff, of late Pope Francis. He really did want to change the Catholic Church. We know that for many millennia, the Church was the processes were steeped in gold and in richery and finery. That's something that the pontiff did away with from the very moment that he took on this mantle as the head of the Catholic Church, not least by appearing in white robes rather than the traditional red.
That's true. He had the humility of a Franciscan, but he also had the courage of Jesuits and of a Latin American Jesuit. And so he was a complex mix of tradition on his views on women in the church, for example, and on innovation. But the most important thing was that he turned the Vatican towards the global world. The global South, the central event for him in modern history was decolonization or colonialism. That was something that put him at odds with many influential intellectuals, political leaders in the Western world. He has been a mix of disruption, of some consolidated ways of doing things in the Vatican, and of reaffirming some of the traditional social views of the Catholic Church on the responsibility of everyone towards everyone, on the limits of private property, on the ills of capitalism. So he was a man of tensions held in polarity, as he used to say.
Tensions held in polarity, a fascinating phrase. Of course, tensions that arguably he tried to make the church more humble, make it more looking towards the poor. But obviously when he became pontiff back in 2013, the church was in a really difficult stage with the scandal over child sex abuse by priests and the institution's attempts to cover it up. What's your assessment of how the pontiff dealt with that? Because this was a really critical time, which was devastating for the church, obviously devastating for the survivors as well. But did he handle it to the best of his abilities?
He handled it in ways that were typical of him, in a particular way, because during Pope Francis' pontificate, what changed is that the abuse crisis in the Catholic Church became more global, in the sense that cases emerged in every continent, every country. It was no longer just a crisis of sexual abuse by priests, but also by lay people, by women, on other women. It has become a very comprehensive phenomenon in which the church is now still trying to find a way. Pope Francis called the first global meeting in the Vatican in 2019, where he asked the cardinals and bishops basically to listen to victims. That was the first time. So it was always limited. This struggle in the church is always a work in progress, but Pope Francis made really incredibly important steps forward, and in ways that needs to be continued. It's far from over, of course.
Is there then an appetite for that in the Vatican, to continue with that direction that Pope Francis has brought about? Or is there a possibility that perhaps a more conservative pontiff will be chosen going forward? Obviously, this is going to take a lot of time. We will have a conclave. But what do you think the direction of travel is and the desire is for the Catholic Church?
We will know fairly quickly in a few weeks, because the conclave will take place in a few weeks. Now, the most important difference from the conclave of 2013 or of 2005 is that right now there's a sense of crisis, not just within Catholicism, but also in the global church. This is the age of Donald Trump, and Pope Francis has been the most visible voice dissenting from a certain view of the human person, of politics, of immigration. So this is the other factor that we did not have to the same extent in previous conclave. We will see how the internal agenda of Catholicism on women, on gays, on transparency will coexist with the global situation. We will also, because this conclave will be made for the first time by the largest number of cardinals. The college has never been as big as it is today, and never as international as it is today. And so it will be a conclave in a very, very dangerous time for our world. And the church will be called to give its own answer to this situation.
It's fascinating to think that we're talking about religion, obviously, but even behind the scenes, there has to the cardinals are grappling with, to your point, Professor, with the changing dynamic of the world. And we know that Pope Francis, he really did have spats with the Trump administration over whether it be immigration, climate change, capitalism, even globalization, that he spoke out. We know, for anybody who's seen the film Conclave, of just how political the machinations are of choosing a new pontiff. Where are the fractions then? Are there any riders coming through? And do they have to think about somebody who potentially, as we're seeing with political leaders, they either do everything to appease Donald Trump or speak out very vocally against him? What do you think is the balance that is happening amongst the cardinals now, the conversations behind those closed walls of the Vatican?
Well, clearly, this is a church which is feeling the impact of Donald Trump's policies on immigration, on trade, in different ways. If it's Europe, if it's Africa, if it's Asia, this is something we don't know how it will play out because we are in the middle of this second Trump administration and of other global disruptions. So it's clear that a more international college of cardinals, with many cardinals coming from Africa, Asia, Latin America, is more unpredictable. And all of them, I believe, will find some kind of consensus on what it means not to be able to count on America anymore in the sense of the defense of human rights and of human development. This is something that's affecting directly church operations in many countries. So it's going to be more complicated than the usual liberal-conservative divide, which exists. But this time, I believe there will be a more existential sense of how Catholicism can hold to its values in terms of the promotion of human dignity of everyone, not just Catholics, in the face of a new political wave that is about might make right. And so this is something very different from the conclaves that I have seen and I have studied in this last century.
Fascinating to get that insight. Absolutely fascinating. Professor Fagioli, Professor of Theology at the Villanova University, thank you very much for your insight. We will be watching very, very closely what happens with the conclave, of course. But for the time being, Professor, thank you so much.